Welcome to Women's Yoga Council. Welcome to the Women's Yoga Council of India podcast, where we explore the vibrant world of yoga, health, and wellness. Welcome to the Women's Yoga Council of India podcast, where we explore the vibrant world of yoga, health, and wellness. We are a sangha of women involved in the field of yoga. In this podcast, we'll be speaking with inspiring individuals who are shaping the yoga industry, innovating in health, and transforming the way we think about mental and physical well-being. From ancient practices to modern research, from personal stories to industry insights, we'll shed light on what's happening in the yoga space and tackle topics that matter in today's world. Whether you're a yoga enthusiast, a wellness professional, or simply curious about how these fields intersect, this podcast is for you. Let's dive in, uncover new perspectives, and learn together. Vanakkam and Namaste. Hello, everyone. I'm Sowmya, and I'm your host today. I hail from a long line of matrilineal spiritual seekers, and being in the field of yoga is my blessing from my foremothers and my karmic responsibility. I'm the president of the Women's Yoga Council of India, and I also run Praful Urja Charitable Foundation, which trains yoga therapists to serve with communities in vulnerable conditions. Currently, I'm a researcher in the field of Yogini Sanghas and diplomacy from Banaras Hindu University's Malviya Center for Peace Research. Today, we have with us Jeffery Long. Dr. Jeffery D. Long is the Carl W. Ziegler Professor of Religion, Philosophy, and Asian Studies at Elizabethtown College in Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania, where he has taught since receiving his PhD from the University of Chicago Divinity School in 2000. He is the author, editor, or co-editor of 12 books, including Hinduism in America, A Convergence of Worlds, which won the Rajendra and Jyoti Gandhi Award for Excellence in Theology, Philosophy, and Critical Reflection from the Dharma Academy of North America in 2022. His latest book is Discovering Indian Philosophy, an introduction to Hindu, Jain, and Buddhist thought. Dr. Long's work focuses primarily on the religions and philosophies of India, mainly Hindu, Jain, and Buddhist traditions, which are the Dharmic traditions, and on themes such as nonviolence, pluralism, and its metaphysical foundations, the pedagogy of teaching Indic traditions in the Western context, of religion and popular culture, of the concept of rebirth. In 2021, he received an award from the International Ahimsa Foundation for his efforts to promote nonviolence through scholarship. And he also, in the same year, he also received the Rank Award for Research Excellence from his college, Elizabethtown College. He has spoken 3 times at the United Nations and also appears in documentaries for PBS and the History Channel. Dr. Long, thank you very much for being here today, and we are truly honored to have you with us.
Thank you for inviting me, and it's my honor to be here. Grateful to be part of this conversation.
Great. So today we're talking with Dr. Jeffery Long about the Holy Mother, Sarada Devi, and her ongoing relevance today. I'm excited to begin and hear your passionate discussion on Ma Sarada Devi. But before then, if you can tell us a little bit about how you came to be interested in India and in the Dharmic traditions.
Okay, very well. I will give the short version of that story because it's my life story. I grew up in a small town in the Midwest in the United States. Did not really have a lot of exposure to or knowledge about India growing up. but my father passed away when I was quite young. He was in a very terrible accident. And then, as a result of that, I lost his life when I was about 12 years old.
Oh,
So
wow.
this sparked sort of very intensive interest on my part in the big questions. What happens after we die? What's the purpose of this life? Why do we suffer? All of those things. And so I began gathering whatever knowledge I could from various world religions, from philosophies. And the short version of the story is by great good fortune, I came upon the Bhagavad Gita when I was about 14. And I had been influenced by popular culture. I think most of us are in the Western world very influenced by popular culture. So the Beatles and George Harrison, their interest in India, that sparked my interest. I saw the film Gandhi when it came out when I was quite young. That sparked my interest. And through those sources, I learned about the Gita, and then I came upon a copy of it, and it just made sense to me. It fit very well with the thought process that I was going through since my father's passing. And from that point on, I was absolutely fascinated, intrigued. I became friends with an Indian family who lived in our small town,
Oh,
and got to know them, got to know the culture a little better that way. Took courses in college, and decided to just pursue this as my full-time interest and make it my career. So I had good advice. I went to a very good graduate school, University of Chicago, and was very proud to get my degree there. And I met my wife there, who is from India, and her
yeah,
field is Japanese. Interestingly, as she
that's
describes
very
herself, she's an Indian teaching Japanese in America, and I'm an American teaching Indian traditions. And in our personal lives too, we are devotees of Ramakrishna and the Holy Mother. And so that's been a big part of our lives as well. And so that's my story in a nutshell.
really that's quite amazing. Very interesting that you've got the whole family involved um, in researching and studying different things, but also practicing the teachings of Sarada Devi. So
Yes.
let's go ahead and dive into understanding more about Sarada Devi herself. And I believe you said you have a presentation. So if you can go ahead
Yes.
and start with that and
Okay.
maybe go through a little bit of the birth and childhood if that's also relevant.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, I have come up with I generated a brief presentation, and I think especially if there are any viewers who are maybe less familiar with Sharada Devi, I think this will give a good short overview, and then from there we can go deeper in our conversation. So this is one of the few photographs of Sharada Devi, probably the most famous one,
Yeah.
that was taken in the early 1890s. And she lived from 1853 to 1920. And she was married to Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. He lived from 1836 to 1886. You can see that there's a pretty big gap in their ages, and that she actually outlived him by quite a lot. And in case any viewers are unfamiliar with him, he's a renowned spiritual teacher from the 19th century. They both hailed from Bengal. They were Bengali. They were both from each from different small villages in what is now West Bengal. After Ramakrishna's passing, Sharada Devi became the de facto leader of the Ramakrishna movement. When I say de facto, what I mean is that she did not hold an official role. In fact, the first president of the order and of the Ramakrishna mission was Swami Brahmananda, one of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. But the movement did not do anything without consulting her and without getting her permission. She very rarely was, I would say, very directive. In other words, she didn't micromanage the movement, but there were a couple of topics on which she felt very strongly, and we can be discussing some of that a little later on, how she really shaped what the movement became,
Yeah.
yet in a very quiet, behind the scenes manner, which was nevertheless very powerful. She initiated countless devotees into the Ramakrishna lineage, including many who would become prominent monks of the Ramakrishna Order. Um, my Param Guru, the guru of my guru in the Ramakrishna tradition, Swami Vireshwarananda, was a very prominent scholar, and wrote a number of translations of commentaries by Shankara and Ramanuja and the Brahma Sutras, commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita. He was one of her initiates. She lived a very simple life, and for most of her life, she lived in the village of her birth, Jairambati, in West Bengal. And I've had the privilege of visiting Jairambati, and there's a
Beautiful.
beautiful temple to her there. But you can see where she was born and the very humble circumstances from which she came. In the tradition, based on her teachings and Sri Ramakrishna's teachings, she's regarded by many as a living goddess, a manifestation of the Divine Mother, and
Hmm.
Sri Ramakrishna himself started this idea. In fact, he performed a puja to her when she came to finally came to live with him in Dakshineshwar, where he was a priest of the goddess Kali. And she was known later as the Sangha Janani in Bengali, that is the mother of the order. And in English, she's referred to very often as the Holy Mother. And in the tradition, we often refer to her simply as the Holy Mother. Her simple and direct manner made her greatly appealing to people during her lifetime. This continues to appeal to devotees globally. And this is quite interesting. I have a friend who's a scholar who's been doing research on specifically on Western devotees and the Holy Mother. And this is really interesting because a woman from a village in Bengal in the late 19th and early 20th centuries would seem to be as far as possible from contemporary America. Yet there are Americans who love Sarada Devi because she's authentic. She had no pretensions and just spoke her mind, and this is very appealing to people in the West. In conclusion, I have just two or three samples of her teaching. She spoke in Bengali, but these have been translated into English. These are just some of the most popular of her teachings. She says, "But I tell you one thing, if you want peace of mind, do not find fault with others. Rather see your own faults. Learn to make the whole world your own. No one is a stranger, my child. This whole world is your own." She says, if you don't work, with what will you occupy yourself day and night? Is it possible to meditate all the 24 hours? She was very, very practical. And she had a way of bringing people, down to earth. Sometimes in the spiritual life, people can get, there's a phase where people can get very enthusiastic and a little impractical. And she would bring them right back down to life, daily
Great.
life. This is a favorite of mine. I've included it. It's part of my email signature. One who makes a habit of prayer and meditation will easily overcome all difficulties and remain calm and unruffled in the midst of the trials of life.
Yeah.
And a couple of interesting things about this particular teaching. As I said, it's in my email signature, and I had it there for a long time, and then a few times I started thinking maybe I should change my signature, maybe I should put a different quote there, vary it a little bit. And just as I would think that, I would get an email from someone about some topic, and then at the end they would say, by the way, I love that quote at the bottom of your email. So after a while I started feeling that I was receiving a message from the Holy Mother. It's like, okay, don't move that. So that quote is there permanently. The other thing too is um, I find when I'm emailing, if you get a little angry with someone, or you're feeling irritated with someone, and you might be tempted to say something unpleasant in an email, and then I think how inappropriate it would be to say something inappropriate or unpleasant in an email and then have it followed by this beautiful quote. It's like, okay, you're
Remain
not you're not very calm and unruffled, are you? So it has made me behave myself online. So I'm
Yeah,
very grateful for that.
wonderful.
But that's just a little sampling of her, very simple yet very profound wisdom, and just very, very brief sketch
No,
of yeah.
and I think that's really amazing that you're stuck with that one quote. You can always add other quotes also.
Oh yeah.
You
I've
can.
I've got a Carl Sagan quote in there too,
Oh,
but
great.
that one, but the one from the Holy Mother is not moving.
Okay. Yeah, the other ones can rotate,
The
but
other
that
one's gonna rotate. That one won't budge now.
well, that's really interesting because I think a lot of spiritual saints. In fact, I have a calendar that I use of Vinoba Bhave's, which is a daily calendar type of thing. I think something just in the last day or two came up very similar that you have to work,
Hmm.
and but while you're working, use your meditation practices to maintain that sense of equipoise. So
Yeah.
that's really profound that so many spiritual leaders have similar thoughts. um,
Yes.
you brought up something which made me realize that maybe a lot of that Sarada Devi was really installed as a goddess, is considered as a goddess. Now,
Yes.
I've actually, in my own research, I've been coming across a similar idea that Andal from Tamil Nadu, who is the composer of, who is an Alvar, a Tamil Alvar saint, she
Hmm.
was also considered as a goddess. And to that extent, I think, even Sita, Radha, and so many women are taken beyond that sainthood, the sainthood, and
Hmm.
made into or deified as goddesses. And I know we haven't really talked about this before, but why do you think women are so likely or have been so likely to become goddesses?
I think that's a fascinating question, and I believe there are a number of possible ways of looking at it. Um, a possibly cynical perspective, but I think it has some merit, is that there might be some amount of overcompensation happening, as in, that women so often have been kept on the margins. And I'm not saying this about India specifically. This is a global patriarchy is a global phenomenon. It's not at all limited to. In fact, India, in many ways, is an exception, but in many ways, it's not. Right there is had the overwhelming majority of the great saintly figures that we focus upon and the teachers have been men, and of course, men have typically had more access to things like spiritual teaching, the traditional education system, studying the Vedas, this sort of thing. And so it could be that there's a little bit of a maybe a guilty conscience there that okay, when these wonderful women come on, we need to really honor them. Now that might be a little bit of a cynical perspective, but then I think another thing too may be that because of the male dominance, um, holiness among women, I don't think this is necessarily the case, but I think it may be seen as something exceptional, as something unusual. And therefore, it's even more celebrated, right?
Mm,
She's not just a saint, she is a
she's
goddess.
beyond
Uh,
that.
and then, of course, and then at the polar opposite end of from the kind of cynical perspective I started with, you have the perspective of the tradition, which is just that, well, she's a goddess. She just is, and so that's why we call her that. And so you have all of those possibilities. But yes, I think you are right that it is less often that a great male sage or saint will be proclaimed an avatar, or now
Yeah,
some are. Ramakrishna himself was also proclaimed to be an avatar, so there are
sure.
claims of deity about both of these people. But yes, you more often a man is credited with being a rishi, a great
They
saint.
have
But
these. They have great gradations
yes,
in terms of
exactly.
there's a Mahatma Gandhi, there's a guru like Vinoba Bhave, and then there's sons like Paramahamsa Yogananda and so on and so forth. There were many people, and Swami Vivekananda, and then there were also avatars.
Yes.
There have also been avatars, and
Hmm.
are still to that extent. There's still quite a lot of gradation, especially amongst the people who embody, or the souls that embody as male, as opposed
Yes.
to souls that embody as women. But there are also female embodied saints, like even as you mentioned from West Bengal,
Right.
Anandamayi is there
Exactly.
as well.
Exactly.
And also in a similar time frame, or
Yeah.
slightly similar time frame.
Yeah.
Great. So can you then tell us? I mean, I know you touched upon Sharada Devi's birth, but and her birth village. Do you have any background to her parentage or her family lineage? Anything?
Yes, her birth name was Sharadomani Mukhopadhyay. She was from a Brahmin family, not a wealthy family, right? And this is something that often students in the Western world sometimes confuse economic class with these ascriptions of Varna, Jati, what is widely
Yeah.
called caste. Now,
Yeah.
they're not the same, right? And so, rather like Ramakrishna himself, she was from a very economically poor, but high status family, right? Brahmin family in Bengal, in Jarambati, and she had siblings, and she was at a very young age, five, in fact, betrothed to Ramakrishna,
Okay.
and we hear that today, and it is alarming, but it was not uncommon at all in the 19th century. And also, and scholars of the Holy Mother always hasten to point this out. This was really it's better described as a betrothal than a wedding. They did not actually live together as husband and wife until she was 19 years old,
Okay.
and then left her family to she visited Ramakrishna before that, saw him, but really didn't become his wife, properly speaking, till age of 19, when she moved to Dakshineshwar, to the place where he was serving as a priest in the Kali temple. So, in her early life was spent in her village, growing up, learning to be a wife. There's stories of her childhood, though, too, where some of her later character traits appear. She was very generous. And whenever she saw anyone who was poor or unfortunate, she spontaneously wanted to give them something. And so and then there are even stories of her organizing people in her village, even at a very young age, to uh, provide food for the poor. And so this remains a theme of her life, all the way through till she passes away in 1920.
Amazing, amazing. So even as a child, she had this innate nature of giving nature.
Generosity, yeah, that was really her dominant character trait, I think, throughout her life, was generosity.
Okay, well, that actually leads me to my next question, because a lot of us, we hear the name Sharada Devi and we associate, yes, with this picture that you showed in the slides.
Hmm.
And many of us, as educated people from around India, have heard her name. We've maybe even dropped it in conversations about spirituality and women.
Hmm.
However, we don't necessarily know what Sharadama has practiced or preached. So one of the qualities that she practiced is this giving nature.
Yes.
What else can you tell us about her philosophies and her practices?
So she was extremely pragmatic, which I mentioned earlier when I showed that quote about work. You need to spend time working, and this pragmatism, this practicality, seems to have offset any tendency one might suspect that she might have toward egotism, right? Because if you hear that someone's been proclaimed a goddess, and the people are telling her she's a goddess and worshiping her as a goddess, one suspicion one could certainly have is, okay, this is going to go to this person's head. They're going to become arrogant. They're going to become egotistical and vain. She was exactly the opposite. Very, very simple, very practical. And so people might be coming to her home in Jarambati and wanting to adore her. And, oh, you're the goddess. Please give us your blessing. And she would look around and she would see these people gathering and say, okay, these people are all going to need something to eat. So she would get up and go to the kitchen and start working and preparing food and getting other people involved in doing the same thing, and saying, okay, all these people are going to need to be fed. And this is a very maternal characteristic, and this sort of focus on food, which is very prominent in her life. It's a
Mm.
consistent theme you also see. So there was the generosity with food, but there was also just the idea of the focus on food obviously as a means of sustenance, but devotees would often say later that they felt that they were receiving her grace in this manner, right? That there was something more than just the material offering of food happening. There was a kind of spiritual transfer happening when she was feeding people. And so
Beautiful.
this was the way in which she bestowed her blessings on people. The other thing about her that is, I think, extremely interesting in some of my writing about this, I've talked about uh, kind of a dialectic of conformity on the one hand and transgression on the other. And what I mean by that is she successfully navigated some of the very conservative expectations on her life while yet also expressing her individuality and really creating a unique space for herself. And there's a really nice example of this. So when Sri Ramakrishna passed away, the conventional practice at the time for widows was that they would cease to wear any jewelry and that they would wear simple white sari, and that would mark them as widows. She had a dream in which Sri Ramakrishna appeared to her. And he said, I have not gone anywhere, right? Don't mourn, right? The body has died, but I am still here. He said, I've just passed from one room to another. And then he said, you're still my wife. And in the dream, he commanded her to, her favorite sari was a white sari with the red border. He
Yeah.
said, continue wearing the sari with the red border and continue wearing the gold bangles, which I gave you, right? He had given these as a gift. He said, continue wearing those. You're my wife, he said. So, in terms of transgression, she's doing something that there were people who were scandalized. You're a widow. Why are you wearing a sari with the red border? Why are you
The
wearing
gold
gold?
bands. Yeah.
But then, in terms of conformity, she could reply to them and say, well, this is what my husband told me to do. So I can't go against that. So uh like this vision gave her this wonderful space in which she, I mean, because that red bordered sari and those gold bangles, that's her sort of signature look, if we want to call it that, right? In the very
Yeah.
famous photograph that's what she's wearing, right? And you see photographs of her from later in life, when she was much older, getting closer to 1920. She's wearing the same thing. And in fact, when we visited Jairambati, there's a school there that's it's the Sharada school. It's a school for girls, and the schoolgirls' uniform is the white sari with the red border.
Oh,
Because we were
oh
there,
yeah.
and I saw this crowd of schoolgirls coming out all dressed like the Holy Mother. I was like, oh my goodness! And then I realized that was their uniform, and so it was this way of expressing her individuality while yet at the same time occupying the very traditional role of a wife. But she was
Yeah.
insisting that in a very profound sense, her husband was not dead, right? He was still a living presence in the world. And of course, that's a very beautiful affirmation as well of that idea that there is no death for the self, right? That teaching in the Gita and so
Yes.
many other texts.
Yes, and it's almost like she's using that family structure. She and Ramakrishna together are using the structure of the family to transgress or to get out of the conventional, and yet still they are, that is that convention. And to say that
Exactly.
through that
Right.
convention, we're going to slowly evolve into what is needed for the day, the contemporary time. Uh,
Precisely. And it's a wonderful example of adaptation that you don't throw out the tradition, you don't throw out the structure, but you adapt the structure.
Yeah, so I'm gonna actually get into then a question about householderhood, because a lot of our
Mhm.
listeners today are educated, middle class, globally aware people of the world. How can these lessons about how to, she's seen as very austere, and yet
Mhm.
she's also this householder. How
Right.
can we practice some of those lessons of Sarada Devi, of being while still enjoying our material and physical comforts? Like if we go to Rishikesh and or we go to into the mountains, now there's all glamping tents, instead of, and so how, and even now in the Kumbh Mela, there's, I went 12 years ago, but now when people are going, you see that the tents, the government has set up all of these tents and set up the place so that everybody can have some amount of comfort, some basic comforts and basic
Right.
so how do we use Sarada Devi as an example and follow that model to
Mm.
to follow the spiritual path while still having our material comforts?
Right. Well, the answer I give, I hope I'm not simply restating the question, but hopefully answering it. But what I see in Sharada Devi's example is uh, a spiritualizing of what we think of as material life, right? That in the outward form of her life, she's still, cooking and, doing
Yes,
all the things that householders do, and yet her every move and every word is viewed by the people around her as really a message from the goddess, right? That something very profound is happening, and we can bring that into our own lives, and I think this is really connected with the concept of karma yoga, which is a big feature of Swami Vivekananda's teaching, but it's also a big feature of Sharada Devi's teaching, which is that we do our work, but rather than simply doing it as normal or doing it for whatever material or other benefits we get from it, to see it as worship, right? There's this great saying of Swami Vivekananda, work is worship, that we can see, and especially when our work involves serving others, you could see that as serving the divine, right? Serving God in the form of suffering beings, whether we're talking about human beings, whether we're talking about animals that are suffering or abused, that you're seeing the divinity in that being and serving. And it creates great humility, right? It diminishes the ego because in this way, I think it's very different from the concept of charity. Nothing against charity, but the idea of charity, as I've grown up with it in the West, sort of comes from the idea that you're very privileged, you're very wealthy, you're very blessed, and wouldn't it be nice, right? Wouldn't it be benevolent of you to share that with those less fortunate, and those less fortunate are in a sense being looked down upon in that model. And Swami Vivekananda said, don't do that, right? See it as service, and it is your privilege, is your honor to be able to serve that other person, and you should be grateful for
amazing,
that. One of the
amazing.
things one of the things that's less known about Sharada Devi is she was the one who really impressed this upon Vivekananda. And this is one of her main influences on the Ramakrishna Order, that
Okay.
they, in a departure from the traditional role of Hindu monks, they began going out and physically serving the poor, providing education, providing healthcare, providing food. And they do this to the present day. The Ramakrishna Order is the largest relief organization in India by far. They have an annual report. I once mentioned this to someone and they expressed skepticism about it. So I sent them a PDF of the annual report. I said, just check it out. The data is there. They do a massive amount of seva, massive amount of service.
Beautiful.
It was the Holy Mother who said, this should be your main mission. This should be your primary mission. And I think this was shaped by the experience of the Bengal famine in the early 20th century, that there was such human suffering everywhere.
Got it.
And again, part of her character was when she saw someone suffering, she immediately wanted to help. And so she essentially instructed Swami Vivekananda, Swami Brahmananda, the others, said, this is what you need to do. And so in fact, there's a very good book that just came out this past year by Professor Ami Sen on Sharada Devi, and he emphasizes this. Right? He highlights the fact that she really promoted karma yoga to the
Mm.
order. A lot of us think, oh, this was Swami Vivekananda's idea, but he certainly did a lot of reflection on it. But he was being encouraged by Sharada Devi that whole time.
Super beautiful. That's amazing that to note that the work of Ramakrishna Order today, which is really a big part of Sharada Devi's legacy, um,
Yes.
is and how much she's influenced that concept of karma yoga and of giving. And what's very interesting is that you're talking about how she ensured that it wasn't a top-down charity, and
Right.
rather it's like a mother well,
Yes.
if you are my children, well, of course I'm going, I have already, you are me. So I'm
Yes.
just giving, and there's a mutual, I'm also receiving from you. And interestingly enough, I've been working towards a book that will be published under the, or a chapter in an edited volume by Carleen Hartung that will be published on women in, it's about women in religious traditions. And
Wonderful.
I'm writing about a woman from, she left the body about 5, maybe 6, 7 years ago, right? But a couple of years before COVID hit, and from Tamil Nadu. And everybody talks about this concept in her as well, that she never
Mm,
saw it as, this is not a giving, it's not a charity, it's a matru seva, it's a giving from the mother, which also gives back to the mother. And so
yes.
there's an equality between.
And
That's so interesting that Sarada Devi has been doing that for over a century.
and I think this is and Sharada Devi's and maybe women's women leaders generally uh sort of unique statement of non-duality, right? Which we normally think of as this very abstract concept. We associate it with Shankara and so on. But that's living non-duality. You are me. So, of course, I'm going to give to you no less than I would feed myself. I'm going to feed you, right? We are one, right? Non-duality. And when that statement of the Holy Mother was when she says, "See the whole world as your own. No one is a stranger." That's non-duality. We are all part of each other.
Yeah.
And this is another thing that's often said about her that she would encounter people from all different classes of society. And there's a very famous story of her, in fact, encountering a robber, dacoit, right out. And she was out in the wilderness. She was, going between Jairambati and Dakshineshwar. She would naturally have been very afraid. But she referred to him as father when she saw him. And she said, Baba, I'm lost. Can you point me the way? And he was so moved by that she did not respond to him with fear or aversion, that he pointed to her the way. He actually walked with her the rest of the way that she was going to be sure that she was not harmed. And it's a very famous story. And years later, he would come back and pay her visits at Jarambati, and he was getting quite old by that time, but he still looked like a bandit. He was this guy that roamed around out in the wilderness. He would come to Jayambati and visit her and, touch her feet and pay his respects. And he would leave, and people would say, "Who was that?" And then she would tell the story. Yeah,
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, and just that here's this dacoit who would normally have maybe threatened her life, killed her, or at least taken her jewelry, or what,
exactly.
even as a poor, even from a lower socio or economic status, they might have still had some amount of gold jewelry, like you said, the gold bangles, and
Exactly.
yet, and yet she was fearless in
Yes.
that.
She was fearless.
Um,
Her love overcame him. Yeah.
um, what so I think we've had an interesting discussion. There are questions that I wanted to ask, but I feel like we've already gotten through that. Maybe how would one of the questions I do have is, we've been hearing about a lot of different margas of yoga, like the different paths.
Hmm.
How would you classify Sharada Devi, and why?
Okay.
We talked a little
So
bit about karma yoga, but
absolutely. So yeah, we've talked a little about karma yoga, and I think that if I had to pick one of the four classic yogas to identify her with, I think it would be that. And but since we have spoken about that a little bit already, I would add that you can see elements of all four really in her life expressed. And in terms of jnana yoga, wisdom, again, her wisdom was spontaneous. It came from the heart. It didn't come from study. Um,
yeah,
but her grasp of non-duality, I think, was quite profound
yeah,
as she exhibited
great.
in her life. So that's Jnana Yoga. She always promoted meditation. To her devotees, she was always saying, "Don't forget to do your japa every day. Every day, do your japa, do your meditation, recite your mantra." This was something that she was very insistent on. So you have Raja Yoga,
And the
the
meditation helps you stay calm.
Meditation helps you stay calm. This is a very famous quote of hers, which
That's the book. Yeah.
I've now adopted into my own life. And then, of course, Bhakti, and she was a great devotee. And this is the thing too, is that you know, people might say, well, if you're a goddess, who do you pray to? You know, like this is the question that when I was growing up in the Christian tradition, people would say, okay, Jesus went to pray, but if he was God, what was he talking to himself? What's going on? But she never missed any of the major pujas. She was always part of that devotional process, and bhakti was a big part of her life, as it was for Ramakrishna. So I would say that as for many of the great sages, there's somewhat of a balance, you could say, of all the margas, and if these beings are really here to teach us and show us how to live, then they're going to exhibit some of all of these. But I
Mm,
do think in terms of where she put her time and energy, that karma yoga is definitely foremost for her.
beautiful. Thank you. Um, you mentioned that recently there is a new book by Sen, did you say?
Amiya Sen, yes, it's
Yes,
called
Sen.
Sharada Devi, Holiness, Charisma, and Iconic Motherhood. And it's a lovely book. I wrote a review of it for the International Journal of Hindu Studies, and
Okay.
it's and this is one of the wonderful things about the Holy Mother, that scholars who study her, um, you know, scholars are scholars, right? We want to be objective, maybe even critical. This is part of our job, part of our function. And yet, people who end up writing about Sharada Devi, I sort of fall in love with her, I think. And Amiya Sen's book is no exception. Like I know him personally. He's a wonderful, wonderful human being, a fine scholar. Uh, I don't think he's particularly devotional. I don't think he sees himself as someone, you know, who is so much on this path, but he writes very admiringly of her personal qualities, and when he is sort of he's trying to explain her great popularity both in her lifetime and now, and he says, you know, she just had this simple charm of, you know, being very direct and honest. What you saw was what you got.
Mm,
There's authenticity there, and that you know, that it is as simple as that. Really, there's no trick, there's no hidden, you know, agenda or anything of that sort. And there's another scholar, not Amiya Sen, there's another scholar who wrote on the Holy Mother, and it's an interesting thing. This other scholar I'm thinking of wrote a book on Ramakrishna and a book on Vivekananda, and both were very, very sharply critical. This person is not he sees a lot of problems, I think,
okay.
with the Ramakrishna tradition. And then he wrote a book on the Holy Mother, and I think everyone was sort of bracing themselves, like, okay, what's he going to say about her? And it's a beautiful. I mean, he really has nothing negative to say about the whole. I don't. No one has a bad word to say about the Holy Mother, and I think that's just incredible because, uh, you know, in our world today, I mean, we find fault with everyone,
With
but
everything and everyone.
yeah, Sharada Devi is one person I haven't yet found a negative word written about her, uh, by anyone. You know, maybe there is something out there, but I probably don't want to see it.
Yeah, yeah, okay. No, thank you so much. I do think that, yeah, I haven't heard any negative, and there have been lately, so many, especially post-COVID, there's been a lot of these, scandals about different gurus and different, and it's so really touching to note that nobody has anything negative about the mother, the Holy Mother.
Nothing. That's right. That's right.
Great. Uh, Thank you so much, Jeffrey. This has been a really interesting talk. I just want to give you any last, I know we didn't cover all of the topics that we had planned to, but so I would just want to ask you if there's anything left that you'd like to add and give you a few moments.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank you and to say I really appreciate the work of the Women's Yoga Council of India, and wish you all the best in your endeavors. I think authentic spirituality is something the world really needs, and the women's voice, right, half of humanity, right, that we don't always hear from, needs to be heard. And in there might be a lot more Sharada Devis out there. that we're not even aware of.
We're not
And
aware of. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so, please continue this work, and I'm grateful to have
Thank you.
been able to participate.
Thank you. Yeah, I was actually going to say now, if you have any, as a conclusion, if you want to tell us your hopes for the Women's Council, Yoga Council of India, and also for this podcast.
Right.
And yeah, but with that said, as I mentioned, I think there's a lot of really amazing work that's starting to come out. I hope, I have this hope, we have this hope, this vision that this podcast becomes something really phenomenal that takes on the world state on a world level, on a world class level, on a world stage. Any last practical exercise or takeaway tasks that we can help that can help our listeners put the ideas that you've brought out into action, like one
Yeah,
small activity?
sure, sure. I think it's important to. I don't want to go on too long of a tangent about this, but there's that wonderful quote of the Holy Mother where she says, "If you want to have peace of mind, don't find fault with others,
Yeah.
find fault with yourself." Right? I think this is an important spiritual practice. I think it can be misunderstood. This is not referring, I think, to like people who are in abusive situations, for example. If someone is being very harmful and toxic toward you, it doesn't mean, well, that's okay. Maybe I deserve it, right? This is kind of an abusive cycle. Don't find fault with others, I think means, don't go out of your way to uh, criticize. But if someone is harmful, you avoid them as best you can.
You pull out
What
of the situation. Yeah.
pull out of that. Yeah, Ramakrishna said he was once teaching, that God is in all beings, and someone said, "What about a tiger?" And Ramakrishna said, "Worship the tiger god from a distance." So they're all too that we sometimes maybe want to keep at a distance, but then that also doesn't mean we hate them, right? It means we're protecting ourselves, but there doesn't have to be any hostility in our heart. They're also part of us. We just maybe haven't yet figured out what part they play, but
That's still that Vedantic philosophy, the non-dualistic philosophy.
exactly.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Long. This was really a very insightful conversation about Sarada Devi, especially raising awareness of what she offered, her giving nature, that idea of Matru Seva, of seeing the other not as a charity and just giving because it's coming from within you. And how some of the practices that she brought out, the legacy that she has, and that legacy of giving that has come through the Ramakrishna Order. Great. So I will let us close this with, for just one moment as I get back to the right screen. Great. Thank you to all of our listeners. Oh. Thank you to all of our listeners. And we will see you next time.